What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about American Horror Story 1984, Episode 3, entitled Slashdance. So I'm going to be completely upfront about this episode, guys. I really am starting to think that this is going to be one of the best seasons that we've seen in quite a long time. And a lot of that is because of just all of these slasher tropes and callbacks to some of the classic slasher movies from not just the 1980s, but kind of the 1970s, the late 1970s, and also the 1990s. I mean, they are really going for the treasure trove of just reference after reference in this entire season, plus a lot of really interesting stuff that they're taking from other popular media and just kind of shoving it into this story. Lo and behold, there's just a lot going on here, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they shake it out. I had my worries at the beginning of the season when we were getting to the camp super quickly, and also the idea that we were going to spend a lot of time at the camp, especially during the course of one night. But given the way they've handled it thus far and some of the big cliffhangers they left us with in this episode, I have to say I'm all for at least another 2 or even 3 episodes in this night with the camp and not even really moving on from that. I really want to see what's going on here. So if that's all you really want to know, if that's all you really wanted to know before I get into what happened in this episode and what I liked and what I didn't like, then just know that I really like this episode and I'm really interested to see where they're going this season. But with that being said, let's just jump right into what happened this episode, what I liked, what I didn't like, and some of the callbacks and just general stuff that we saw in tonight's episode. So this episode began where last week left off with our 2 groups separated as Mr. Jingles and the Night Stalker are stalking both of these groups. By the time the last episode ended, we didn't really know exactly who was going after who, but this episode cleared that up pretty quickly as we had the Night Stalker going after Brooke, Ray, Chet, and Rita, and pretty much solidifying the fact that Ray is just the worst in this entire show. I have my favorites now that all of this is starting to play out, and we have an idea of exactly who all these characters are, but Ray is just terrible, and he only gets more and more terrible as the episode goes on. I'm just really happy that they ended it where they did. But right off the bat, he's like, okay guys, we're going to separate and one of us is going to die instead of all 4 of us, or instead of fighting the Night Stalker, or in general just trying to work together and figure out a way for everyone to survive. He is totally fine with throwing people off the bus, but lo and behold, as he's willing to leave everyone, the Night Stalker breaks through and ends up slashing him almost to death until Chet comes and saves his ass. Then we cut back to Trevor, Xavier, and Montana as they're being stalked by Mr. Jingles before we realize that, in fact, this is actually a Mr. Jingles night, and a lot of teenagers come to the camp and cause a lot of mischief and just kind of pick on people. In fact, they're the ones who said they made the calls in the episodes before, so that kind of clears up that mystery, although we're not entirely sure if that is the case. I mean, they said, have you gotten any weird calls? But then they said a lot of people make weird calls, so are they the ones making those calls, or is there something bigger there? We're not entirely sure, but those kids quickly got killed off by the real Mr. Jingles, allowing our group to make a run for it. Then the episode cuts back to our first group as they've separated into 2 other groups, with Rita and Brooke making their way to their car, and then Chet and Ray falling into the hole and getting stuck. Chet gets impaled, and before the episode gives us even more of a reason to hate Ray than we already have, the episode cuts to Mr. Jingles as he runs into one of the other fake Mr. Jingles, which is just like this short guy who doesn't really belong, and Mr. Jingles just kind of, lets this guy live, which I thought was kind of funny. And like, you need little bits of humor in all of this, the fake Mr. Jingles and everything related to it. Personally, one of the things that it reminded me of were the fake serial killer people from season 2 back in the asylum days. I'm not entirely sure if a lot of people are going to like that part of this show or even, hate it for what it's worth, considering the fact that it just seems like more of a riff on something they did better in previous seasons. But, they're done, it's over with, and we're not going to really have to focus on them anymore, so I'm totally fine with it. It didn't really take up a whole lot of the story. Anyway, the episode then cuts back to Rita and Brooke as Rita drugs Brooke, and we are left with a big cliffhanger as it went to commercial. But when they came back, and I really have to say, I think I called it with the trailer breakdown if you guys saw that, because I knew that Rita had something to do with Mr. Jingles. I just didn't really know what. I was happy to see what they did with it, but I'm not really sure what her motivation is other than just trying to study him and figure out what makes him tick. We cut back into this extended flashback where we realize that the Rita that we knew from the first couple episodes is not in fact the Rita who was supposed to be the nurse at Camp Redwood. In fact, she is a psychologist trying to study Mr. Jingles, and she was the one who helped him escape, and now she's going to see what he does when he goes back to the camp in order to study and possibly end the whole concept of serial killers altogether. The reason I liked this scene, other than the fact that we're trying to get a little bit more into these characters and understand their motivations and what led to this night in particular, was it kind of felt like Mindhunter Light. If you guys seen that Mindhunter show on Netflix, I mean, it's kind of good. I love David Fincher. I feel like he pretty much makes gold everything he touches, but at the same time, I didn't really get overly invested in that show. I watched the first season, and I didn't really find a reason to continue watching past that. And to me, watching this scene really felt like they were trying to riff off that narrative and trying to build off of Mindhunter, but just in the American Horror Story sense. I'm not entirely sure it worked. In the end, they needed a reason for Mr. Jingles and Rita to be working together, and thus, I guess it works out. I will say one of the best things about that flashback scene was seeing the real nurse Rita being taken over, and we didn't know exactly what happened to her. I felt like that was a perfectly paced scene, and it really did feel a little bit ominous. Like we didn't know whether this imposter Rita that we have known since the first episode was going to kill this girl to make her point, or if she was going to do something a little bit more nefarious, like giving her to Mr. Jingles, which is kind of inevitably what happened. But, you know, I really wish that they had done something a little bit more creative with her. I understand that you need these characters to know that they're not dealing with the real Rita and have a reason for them to not trust her, but I feel like it would have been a little bit more interesting to have her do something a little bit more nefarious in order to kind of show just how committed to this that she was, and not just simply tie her up and gag her so she couldn't do anything until after the night was through or whatever. I'm not really sure what she planned to do with her, but considering the fact that now she's dead, who really knows? Anyway, that brings us back to Ray. What do you do with this character? I'm glad they did what they did with him, and that leaves me in kind of a pickle when it comes to the rest of the season. I will talk about it in this video at the very end, but with Ray's character, the backstory of everything that happened last summer, a lot of riffing on I Know What You Did Last Summer in that flashback, especially the fact that the title card was last summer. I mean, obviously they're trying to point to that franchise, it really shows, but the fact that he caused the death of one of his fraternity pledge members, and the fact that he's running from the cops, he dropped out of school, and the only reason he's at the camp is because he was trying to save his own hide. I've had a couple people in the comments section tell me that Ray is really not the type of character who is going to survive. I mean, based off of contracts and what we knew and how many episodes he was going to appear in and everything. But in general, the way they were showing him, the fact that he didn't seem like a mainstay character, and now everything they did in this episode, you kind of knew how that was all going to shake up. You just didn't realize that it was going to be 3 terrible things. I mean, seriously, if you didn't watch the episode yet, we're only on 2. He did 3 terrible things, and by the time he gets his comeuppance, you're happy that that happens. Anyway, when Ray is done telling his story, he climbs out of the hole and leaves Chet literally to die so he can leave Camp Redwood and just forget this entire night. That's when we jump back to Trevor, Montana, and Xavier as they're discussing saving Margaret and Birdy. If you don't remember who Birdy is, that's the cafeteria lady in the first episode, and it kind of makes you think. I mean, we don't really know who Trevor is. We haven't really gotten any of his backstory yet. Why is he so insistent on saving Birdy? Maybe they do have some relationship here and there, and that's why he's making sure that they save him, or maybe he's just that good of a guy. But at this point, the episode starts moving rather quickly. They run into Ray, and then Trevor makes sure that Ray and Montana go to get his bike as Xavier and Trevor go and look for Chet. Trevor and Xavier find Chet, and Xavier helps Trevor out of the hole while one of the fake Mr. Jingles is walking around, and Trevor just simply pushes him into the hole and essentially kills him. I mean, they were right to do it, but that to me is probably one of the best things about this episode too, when I'm talking about you need kind of lighthearted moments, because yeah, it's a little tragic, but you know, everyone can understand in that situation, and they really did make a mistake, but they thought their lives were at stake. And that's one of the best things about this entire episode is the scenes between Trevor and Xavier. These two characters are awesome. Literally, I'm sitting here watching this episode and thinking, guys, just forget about Coven, forget about the witches coming back in any real shape or form in the future of American Horror Story. Give me an entire season when it's just the adventures of Trevor and Xavier, and I want to see how that plays out because the chemistry between them is amazing. Anyway, we have Ray and Montana getting to Trevor's bike as the Night Stalker comes literally out of nowhere. Ray gets on the bike and drives away, leaving Montana left to fend for herself. And you think that Ray gets away, having done the trifecta of really terrible things in one episode before his head gets lopped off by Mr. Jingles himself. As Mr. Jingles walks calmly back to the park, and you feel like Montana is in a really bad situation before the episode leaves us off with Montana having known the Night Stalker, and in fact, they are both targeting Brooke for some unknown reason. That's really interesting, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in the trailer breakdown, but the last thing I really wanted to say before I leave off on this video is that after watching 3 episodes of American Horror Story 1984, outside of Ray, as I've talked about a lot in this review, outside of him, I don't want any of these characters to die. I feel like they're really building all of these people up to be fairly enjoyable, and I feel like that's one of the reasons this season is a major standout as opposed to some of the later seasons that we've seen from this series. And I'm really wondering what they're going to do now that they've literally taken off what I would assume is their only weak link. I mean, I guess if you want to be fair, they can take out Birdy because we don't know a whole lot about her. I don't really care if they take out Margaret or Chet, but Brooke, Rita, Trevor, Xavier, Montana, all of these actors and their characters staying into this story for at least the foreseeable future or pretty much down the line throughout the season, that would be interesting. I mean, using them again sometime in the future seasons, probably not so much, but I really don't want them to die. And the fact that we haven't had a whole lot of kills yet in a season dedicated to slasher movies is pretty interesting to me and kind of disappointing because who knows what the future holds. And losing any one of these characters in the next couple episodes would be rather disappointing. So guys, that's all I really have to say about this episode of American Horror Story 1984. Like I said at the beginning, I really liked it. If you haven't watched it thus far and you want to catch up by watching the first 3 episodes, it's really good. I don't know what they're going to do here, but it's off to a fantastic start. Probably one of the best starts of the series in literally maybe since Hotel. I would say maybe Hotel had a pretty interesting start, and then it kind of fell apart, at least at the end, if you're asking me. But if we're going to be completely honest, ever since Coven, I feel like this is the best start since Coven. So guys, what are your thoughts on this? Tell me in the comment section below. I hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload. It's been real.